he has to recognize the others too, because to contradict the others means to contradict the supreme principle. The supreme principle, remember, can be in three ways. One, the principle of being, called the principle of identity. Every being is some being. Or everything which is a being. Something like they can express it different ways. Then there's the principle of non-contradiction. Nothing can be and not be at the same time. Nothing can be and not be at the same time under the same respect. Then there's the principle of, that's the principle of non-contradiction, that's section one. There's the principle of excluded middle. Sorry, I should have written these. This is identity, this is non-contradiction, sometimes they just call it contradiction. Non-contradiction, this one's the principle of excluded middle. Between be and non-be, there's no third. To deny them is utterly absurd. The people who deny it usually are implying it. It's implicit in their words, whether they know it or not, or whether they like it or not. One of the principles I've found today very common, because some of the movements throughout the world deal with this. What do they say in Islamic culture or something? If he disagrees with us, kill him. If you can't beat him up. That's the generic statement as I see it. And I've been with audiences and I've said, you know the supreme principle today, don't you? If you can't beat them, and they all say the same, join them. No, beat them up. So you attack the person. That's called ad hominem in logic. Against the person, argue against the person, not against the argument. Oh, you know what he is, he's a such and such, and you can't believe him, that sort of thing, attacking the person. Now the conclusion of all this is we can know the truth. We can know truths, and we defend them most rigorously. And in a good author like Macquart in Latin, or Woodbury in English, or some of those people in the French world. The French have written some beautiful books on some of this stuff. And these books, they bring the principles out every time. But you can read some books, you never read a principle. No principles of reason whatsoever in them. So the evidence comes always from certitude of the evidence, the middle term. And to use that is to do a philosophical act. So what we do always is to reduce immediate statement or proposition or judgment, reduce it to an immediate one. That's what the philosopher does. He takes something that you've got to prove to something which is self-evident. Reduce it to something which is self-evident all the time. And good but rare authors do that. You reduce immediate demonstration to an immediate one. One that doesn't need proving. It's self-evident. Now you might ask on page 128, what certitudes can we have? What kind of things can we be certain of? There are two. One is facts, something which is immediately evident to the senses, immediately evident. The book is on the table, the camera's on the table, the tape recorder's on the table. Mr. Joe Carnevale is in the room. But the medium there is, I saw him, I talked to him. That's as close as you can get sometimes to an immediate truth. Then on the other hand, that's with the senses. On the other hand, with the intellect. And if you stick to the intellect long enough, you'll arrive at the truth. Try and exclude all imagination. It's very difficult sometimes. They say there are only 1 in 12 people think with their intellects. The other 11 don't. But I think a truer statement is the other 11 think more with their imaginations. You take, for instance, the pro-life movement. The argument they use is the sacredness of life. That's an easy, imaginative argument. Oh, little baby, a physician, I had to speak, a Jewish rabbi and I and some others spoke at a big pro-life gathering. It was enormous in Ottawa. Incidentally, it backfired. The rabbi said, I will admit you could have an abortion after you've had 3 children, which undercut the whole thing. Needless to say, I stuck my bib out on that one. But the people, Dr. Bellefeuille was given a prize as the pro-life activist of the year. Listen to what he said to me. After we'd been speaking, and I outlined proofs, etc., he said, you go about it the wrong way. When I have a woman in my office and I say, what you have is a beautiful little baby, that's arguing the imagination, because that's what most people are capable of. I said, Dr. Bellefeuille, we're not in your office at the moment. We're in a public forum here. We're entirely out of place. I said, that's a rhetorical argument. And for me to use that would be absurd. In fact, it's not even a rhetorical argument, it's really a literary argument. He said, you use rhetoric. When? And anyway, he walked off. But he was given a prize for arguing, and I don't know what he did, just because he said, a babe, woman, you've got a little baby inside you. Isn't that beautiful? But if you're dealing with the science of ethics, you have to use scientific arguments, not appeal to the person's imagination. So everything must be reduced to principles of reason, if we can. That's what we can be certain of. Then if the person denies that, then you've got him over a barrel. You proved it. You can show him that what he's doing is denying the principle of non-contradiction. You reduce everything to the principle of non-contradiction. Would that new student there ask a question?
I have an example I ran into to document how some of these other disciplines don't realize what they're doing. When I was a graduate student at Notre Dame, I was taking a course in Boolean algebra from a Professor Lejewski, a member of the Warsaw School of Symbolic Logic. And we're going through various axioms. He came to the 53rd axiom to be demonstrated, and we looked at it, and it was the principle of excluded middle. The graduate students were going out chuckling to themselves. 53rd axiom. What were we doing on the other 52?
Yeah. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Yes. So many faculty have no understanding of these things. I remember when I left Australia in 1958 to study abroad, I don't know whether abroad was blonde or brunette. Sorry about that. But well, that's what was said to me when I was leaving. You study abroad. What's her name? Well, my brother once, we were going on a holiday, the family, when we were very young, and my brother was quite a character in those days. He's got a bit sour since, but he was very great wit at the time. And there's one of these roadside farm stalls selling fruit and vegetables, and Mum and Dad pulled up to get some. Big notice up. Local honey. My brother says, trot her out, I'd like to meet her. He became later an engineer designing enormous power stations like this one we have here. Enormous power stations. And the one that he became the manager of was eventually just a little less than this one, I think. Or maybe the same size, I don't know. It was a different shape anyway. However, so, yes, it's amazing. You hear them come out. And, oh yes, that's right, I started to tell you about the young man. He says, I want to study and take my doctorate in something special that's never been studied before, the philosophy of psychology. I said, you're 24 centuries too late. Aristotle wrote that. The philosophy of psychology. That's the next course we'll be having, of course, here. But philosophical psychology. And nobody ever studied it before. And he got a shock to what I told him. I said, good God, I studied that about 15 years ago, 20 years ago myself. Anyway, so much for that. So the certitudes we can have, the principal ones are, and they throw the light of their certitude on facts, the principles of reason. And above all, a philosopher is a guardian of the principles of reason. And the philosophical act, what does a philosopher do? What kind of actions does he do? He throws the light of the principles on facts. I heard a Jesuit, he had been a Jesuit, he wasn't ordained finally. He was a classmate of mine, a very wonderful friend. And he thought that was all a lot of strange nonsense. That the principles are to the mind as lights are to the eyes. But it's a beautiful analogy. Light makes, we'll be dealing with this shortly, I don't think we'll get time to do it today, but next class. Light illuminates colour so that we can see things. The principles illuminate facts so we can understand causes. That's what the philosopher's after in every other science, causes. Remember the definition of a science? Certain knowledge through causes. Remember that? And then the other definition of philosophy, certain knowledge of all things through their ultimate causes in the light of the principles of reason. There's no excuse for not knowing that. You'll find that at the beginning pages of our text here, when we started that, of course. So, science, we come to see on principles of reason and science, the consequence of certitude in reasoning, on page 128. So, science is the fruit of demonstration. That's what science is, the fruit of demonstration. One way or another. We'll see there are two kinds of science. Empirical science is perhaps less deserving of the name of science than truly demonstrative science. But empirical science, I should have worded that a bit better perhaps, it's also demonstrative, but its evidence, its middle term is observation always. Observation. We observe kangaroos or chipmunks or bunny rabbits or something in a test tube, change of colour, but it's always reduced to a sensation ultimately. Always. What did you observe? Professor Fawcett, when we started studying inorganic chemistry, students will come to me, he said, and will sometimes say, is chromium chloride soluble, sir? He says, I always say, go and try it. Skinny Fawcett, big long beanpole of a man, and he was quite elderly when he was teaching us. And a deputation of students had to see him on one occasion, and I was amongst those students, the four of us. And I sat silently and listened. And the only time I opened my mouth, I insulted him and didn't realise it until after I'd finished. Oh boy, I could have cut my tongue off. Anyway, the point is, observation is what belongs to the empirical sciences. Empireia in Greek, observation, signs, the appearances of things, see the appearances. But the philosopher understands through essences, through the natures of things. That's the big job of the philosopher, through the natures of things. So science is the fruit of demonstration. So empirical science, and remember what the Catholic Academy of Sciences secretary said to me, after my presentation, a paper at the Academy 2 years ago. He said publicly that a lot of people don't regard philosophy and theology as sciences. They're actually more scientific than chemistry. More scientific. Why? Because they arrive at more certain conclusions. They're not just based on the appearance of things, which may or may be wrong. For instance, I said this in Radio Canada when giving a broadcast on one occasion, and the programming officer came to me after. He'd been a classmate of mine at the University of Montreal in philosophy. And he said to me, I don't understand that. When I said that water, we can't be utterly certain that water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. But he said it's been tried many times. He said, we know that with certitude. I said, how? Can you exclude something in the water or in the test tube, which might influence it to appear to boil at 100? Can you be certain of the elements in that? Not like you can with a principle of reason. You can say you've got a high probability, but not out of certitude, that it boils at 100.
And of course, Aristotle's definition of the scientific syllogism tells us that we find out that something is so, why it is so, and why it cannot be otherwise.
Yes.
So the degree of certitude that is found in philosophy, most people haven't got a foggiest notion of what it is.
No, that's true. The certitude in philosophy is vastly different from the certitude in the empirical scientists. And the empirical scientists don't understand that. That certitude we can have. So that one of you, having just studied, say, a semester of this stuff, can often know much more than a leading physicist. And the certitude is different, vastly different. So, my friends, we cannot be utterly certain that water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. It is a high probability, and most likely it does. But what certitude have we got? There's always that element of doubt. I spoke to a chemist at Niagara University, and she said to me, then you don't call it water if there's something else in it. I said, but you don't know. It might only be the minutest trace of something. It might be the influence of the light through the test tube. We don't know. The point is, anything we don't know throws a doubt on the certitude.
I always used to tell my students, if they wanted to be sure of something, go home for the weekend, this was their assignment, get the largest roofing nail they could find and sit on it. And by the time they come back, they'd be certain of something.
Yes. Up goes the weasel, yeah. So you're right. Demonstration shows the necessity of connection between the subject and the predicate. And these empirical sciences, for instance, geology, botany, zoology. Here the inclination is to call botany and zoology biology here, but they're two distinct sciences. At the University of Sydney, there's an enormous building, School of Botany. Then there's an enormous, another building, School of Zoology. But here they'll just have one school called it biology. I never understood that. But, so, chemistry, physics, experimental physics. So they're all the empirical sciences. Demonstration shows the necessity of connection of subject and predicate. But we cannot do that with these other experimental sciences. We can't show the necessity of the bond between subject and predicate. Now remember, laboratories are not where science takes place. This is only preparatory to the scientific act. The scientific act takes place in the human intellect. Pardon me. Something that people, especially young students, don't understand. You've been working for a century in a laboratory, but not do one scientific act. I've asked people, what do you mean by science? Oh, examining nature with test tubes and Bunsen burners and all that. Torche de la Tève, as they say in the south of France. I told you I'd never say bullshit in this class, didn't I? In the south of France, they say Torche de la Tève. So, and the scientific act takes place in the human intellect. Remember what the word experiment comes from. Experimentum in Latin, and in French it has been translated as expérience. An experience. That's all taking place in the laboratory. It's just a controlled experience. Little more than that. Sometimes it's very clever. Tremendous advances are made. Rightly so. And deserving of the greatest praise possible. But the misunderstanding between the empirical scientist and the philosopher frequently is quite unjustified. So science, number 2, science and its principles. Logic, the supreme principle, we call that the instrumental philosophy. Some deny that it's a part of philosophy. But it's the philosophy of what's happened in the mind. It's the order between things. You saw that triangle I had. Subject, predicate, middle term. the order, study of that. And there are 64 possible combinations. Only 19 of them are valid, as I pointed out before. So the supreme principle is, if two concepts are identical with a third, they are identical with each other. For example, social philosophy. Every agent operates according to an end. There's a supreme principle of social philosophy. Every agent operates according to an end. We call the end the common good. And we argue from the common good to the necessity of an authority, government, to direct all our efforts towards that common end. Because there's no coordination without subordination. We study those principles in social philosophy very beautifully. So there are two kinds of science. The third point I want to make there. Two kinds of science, as we've been saying pretty well all along. But I wanted to have something to say about them tonight, which we have said before, but it fits better into this particular aspect of things. Supposing there's silver. That represents silver. Then we've got man, represents man. Who does it look like in the class? Anyone? Silver. Why is silver silver and not gold? Why is silver silver and not a tadpole? What makes silver be silver? We don't know. We can only tell its appearances. All we can see is that it melts at 980 centigrade. It boils at 2000 degrees centigrade. It conducts heat beautifully. It conducts electricity beautifully. It's very malleable. It has a brilliant luster. We know all those things. But what is silver in itself? We don't know. Take an ant and an elephant. We can only go on outside external appearances. We don't know what the difference is. Why is an ant an elephant? I'm sorry, why is it an elephant? I'm talking about the ants that crawl up the wall, not the ant that's married to your uncle. And the point is, it's all we can do is the observable characteristics of the thing. That's all we can do to distinguish it. These are all observables. Melting point, what do? We observe a needle or something. 2000 degrees centigrade, we observe something on a needle or a movement of mercury along something else. How I remember these things when we were studying organic chemistry. We had physical chemistry of organics and studying the melting points and things of various things and learning techniques of how to do them. It was sometimes quite funny. But man is by nature a talky animal. Man is by nature a laughy animal. Wherever you find man, you find him laughing. But it's not just from that we know that. He's a social animal. He's a political animal. He's an economic animal. He's a poetic animal. He's a musical animal. He's a religious animal. And so on and so on and so on. But all of these, we know. Is man any different then from knowing a piece of silver? Yes, because the arrows really are going the wrong way. Because we do know what makes him be that. We know he's intrinsic specificative. We know within him what specifies him. Man is a rational animal. Therefore, he's talking. Therefore, he's a laughing animal. Therefore, he's a social and a political animal and an economic animal and a poetic and musical and religious. It's his rational nature that causes those things. They're all metaphysical properties. By metaphysical properties, we mean they're the same. Man being a social animal is the same as man being a rational animal. Metaphysical properties mean that they're the same thing, but you look at them in a different way, that's all. Man talks because he's rational. He's got something to say. Dogs and monkeys have got the vocal cords. I've heard them make sounds. You know, dog says, "Good morning." Heard it sound that. It was on television. And monkeys they've trained. There's the expert. Dr. Bonnet is an expert in that field. Trained them to say something. But it's only the matter of speech. It's not true speech. Same as laughing. You're training kookaburra. I've gone into a forest in the mountains and I've let out the kookaburra call. Students many times have go to me, "Oh, how do they go?" They knew the buggers, but they just wanted me to say it, to do it. And one day I let out the kookaburra call, and poor Dorothy Gould in the next classroom, remember Dorothy? She stopped. She had a speech, some kind of speech. What was it? A speech she was in your department, wasn't she?
Well, she was affiliated with my department.
Affiliated with that.
Essentially what she taught was the mechanics of speech.
The mechanics of speech, that's it.
The actual mechanics.
And she said this horrible laughter came screaming through the corridor and stopped the student who was delivering a speech at the time. So I won't do it tonight. But that's only the matter of speech. That's not true laughter. I've heard a whole forest of kookaburras go off when I've done it many times. I've let go of the call, and then you hear all the kookaburras burst into this pseudo laughter. The same with speech, with chimpanzees and things like that. Even if they do bite, a bit of thumb off, wasn't it?
They're worse than that.
Yeah, so was it? Whoa! Well, let's not discuss whatever it was then. But anyway, this woman was teaching the chimps to speak. But what do we call that? Training. We don't call it education. You train the animal for our sake. You educate a child for its sake. Vastly different. So, what we do, the animals have the appearance of some of these things, but it's all built into them as an instinctive behavior. For instance, something will take the leadership, and it looks like political. Some will live in what might appear to be groups. St. Thomas, for instance, in his beautiful work on kingship, he talks about cranes and ants and bees. They look as if they're social animals. They're only carrying out instinctively the material aspects of society. They're not in true society, of course. If they are, where are their universities? Where are their schools? Where are their musical organizations? Where are their choirs, etc.? Vastly big difference, my friends. So, the two kinds of science. This one we call perinoetic. In other words, peri means around in Greek. Noesis means knowledge, knowledge around. In Latin they called it scientia quia, science that. Whereas this one in Latin they'll call it scientia propter quid, science on account of which. In other words, we know the causes of this, we don't know that. So this is dianoetic. Knowledge through. These are the two kinds of science, my friends. All human sciences are divided into one of those. So that brings, this one is a greater certitude than this one. The dianoetic has a greater certitude than the perinoetic. We have no idea why silver is distinct from a monkey. As Dr. Dealey well pointed out, and he's written works on evolution, like Dr. Bonnet, he pointed out that it would be the structure, if anything, that we can distinguish them. But it still doesn't tell us why, what the difference is. Now, when we come to study the theory of knowledge, as we will do in philosophical psychology, we'll learn that the more materialized something is, the more it's not understandable to us. The more the form, we know forms as they're in bodies. If I talked about Michael the Archangel, you've only got a vague notion of what I'm talking about. Really, we're all said and done. But when I'm talking about some form as found in a bodily thing, it's closer to us. But the form we have, in other words, that inside fixer that fixes us to be what we are, and we prove this with the most rigorous scientific proofs, namely our rational soul, that's the closest thing to us. It's the one thing we can give the specific difference of. We're an animal that is rational. We prove that beautifully in philosophical psychology. Aristotle saw it, and Anaxagoras saw it about 26 centuries ago. Beautiful proof. Just in a few words, he dashed this off. Aristotle brought it out, Woodbury brought it out, others along the road have brought it out, and Woodbury brought it out magnificently in recent years. And we prove that. Because man is a rational animal. He's the only rational animal. God's not rational. His intellect is an intuitive intellect. He doesn't have to reason things out. He sees it instantly. That's the difference between an intuitive intellect. Our senses are intuitive powers. I don't have to reason out the black and white of this. I see it intuitively. I like the word intuitive. I've traced it back in Latin. The two-part, if you use the word do, you've got it. We do immediately with a thing. That word know knows immediately. So the two gives the key to the word. We operate immediately in the thing without any medium. We don't have to have proof between the sight and the thing itself. We know the thing itself immediately. So those sciences, external senses are intuitive, and lost my point there now. But the powers, the intellect, knows intuitively that 2 and 2 equal 4. Then it can defend it in various ways. And we know we have a certain intuition of the principles of reason. I've tested a little niece, I think I've told you this before. A little niece on one occasion asked me, she was 3 years old, her name was Michelle. I used to call her Itchy Mitchy. And she had difficulty coming into the world and went out of the world with equal difficulty with cancer, bad cancer. Little Michelle, Uncle, would you cut my apple for me? So I cut the apple and palmed one half behind my back. I put the knife down. There's your apple. Where's the other half? I said, half an apple's equal to a whole apple? Are you kidding? 3 years of age. She knew the whole is greater than its part. She knew it. Try and put it over little kids. That's why they say learning languages. I found that in the south of France, chatting to kids at school. Today they'd charge you with loitering around the playground or something. But I remember talking to lads. It was a lot of fun, as a matter of fact, in the playground. We were just walking past and just stopped and chatted for a few minutes. And little kids will pull you up when you make a mistake. Adults are too polite. But little kids will laugh, say, "Vous avez un accent tout à fait anglais, n'est-ce pas?" You've got an accent, quite English, or something like that. So, there we are. So, we see the difference, sort of intuitively, between ants and elephants, or between gold and trees. But we cannot discover the specific difference. But man, we can know the specific difference, the only thing we can know. There's some things too materialized. Some things are too materialized for us to know them. Things below us are all too earthy, too material, the form is absorbed in the matter, too materialized. We'll see all this in philosophical psychology. But there are other forms that are too high for us to know. They're knowable. God is knowable, for instance, in himself. He's absolutely, according to himself, the most knowable thing that ever existed, or that could exist. An ant is too materialized. Some things are the form is too absorbed in the matter and too coextensive with the matter for us to know it, the specific difference. Some things are, as the ancients used to say, quoad nos, as far as we're concerned, too high for us to know. I came through the Suez Canal when NASA was in control of Egypt. Remember this well, watching the fighter planes buzzing our ship. SS Strathmore it was her last voyage, I think, Greek and English migrants aboard. And it buzzed our ship. And I looked out over the desert, and I could see a man with a camel and another man doing some work at the side of the canal, but looking over the desert. What do you know from snow? The same thing. Some things can be too visible for our sight. Then in the dark, you're groping around, you can't see things. Some things are not visible enough. Likewise, some things are too intelligible for our intellects, some things are not intelligible enough. It's similar fashion. We deal with that in the theory of knowledge when we're studying that in philosophical psychology. So that's what the empirical sciences are up against. That two materiality, I should say. They're too material. And consequently, they just have to go by observable characteristics. The only way we can know things, by, how do you know what the difference is between an ant and an elephant? Well, the first thing you do, you take a look and say, yeah, I can see they're about the same size. Oh, somebody say the wrong thing. You can see that there's a difference. You can understand as you dissect them, you can see different organs. The ant is an insect. Insect, cut into three. Stomach, thorax, abdomen, and head. Those three things. That's an insect. But then you look at the elephant, you say, he's got that too. Those three parts.
The reason that we tend to be materialists is because all we know through the five senses. And the senses are ordered to corporeal being. So
ordered to what?
Corporeal being.
Oh yes, corporeal being. Yes.
So men naturally tend to be materialists.
Materialists, yeah.
It's very hard for them to get beyond that.
That's why 11 out of 12, as it's commonly said, think more with the imagination than they do with the intellect. Because it's more fitting, more at the same level as themselves, as it were. More at the same level. And all the things around us are at the same level as us. And it takes an effort to raise it that use the intellect. That comes more to some than it does to others, of course, more readily. So that's what the other sciences depend upon. The senses. More. The philosopher also starts with the senses. But the empirical sciences end with the senses. The other scientists, the philosophical scientists, they arrive at last in the intellect. There's a beautiful thing drawn by Yves Simon when he's talking about the distinction between a mammal as looked at by the philosopher and as looked at by the empirical scientist. The empirical science will describe a mammal as what mama's got, breasts, supply milk. And what's milk? It's a white liquid, etc., etc. All in observable signs. But what will the philosopher end up doing? Potency and act, the fundamental principles of being. That's how he'll describe them eventually. So, big difference there. So, but science and its principles. Its principles are there all the time. And there are two kinds of science. But what are the principles of the empirical sciences? The principles are observation, or observable principles, if you like. Observable principles. That's the empirical scientist always. And rightly so. In other words, we can know a vast amount of knowledge because of our ability to understand this. But about man, we're much more limited when it comes to the other animals and plants and things like that. But here, we can know more things this way than we can this way, because the only specific difference we can really grasp is rational man's specific difference.
Can you equate or substitute metaphysical for rational?
Well,
Man, metaphysical animal.
Yeah,
rational
exactly. You could say that.
Yeah. Well, here's what I'm getting at. If you take away the characteristics of silver,
Oh yes.
okay, then it's gone. If you take away the characteristics of rational man, you still have man. He's not irrational man.
No.
No?
No. If you take away rational, no, don't equate irrational with non-rational. Strangely enough, I think St. Thomas does. I always marvel at that. Irrational means a rational thing that's gone crazy, but non-rational means he's not rational at all. Man is rational, and of course you and I know, since you're a teacher, we know that there are degrees of rationality amongst people, aren't there? What makes one a better think than another? The organization of the internal senses. The disposition of the internal senses so that the intellect can operate on them better. The brain is not the organ of the intellect, far from it. It presents the object to the intellect through the four internal senses: sense consciousness and its storehouse, imagination; cogitative power and its storehouse, sensitive memory, as we'll see. So they present to the brain, but some have a different organization. This little girl, Jenna, that you know so well, who's not here tonight, she's quite sick at the moment. She amazes me at times, the grasp that little girl has of things. My brother met her and he said, she's not dumb. She'd let you think she was dumb sometimes, but she's not dumb. Not nearly the way people might think. So, and by the way, you've never met a better-willed person in all your life, as Dr. Bonnet and I can vouch for that. Magnificent, beautiful will, that young woman. She's 28 in August, by the way. So, these things here are all rooted in the rationality of man. They're the same thing, looked at from a different viewpoint. What is laughter? It's the rational animal seeing the disproportion in things. Same thing. What is talking? It's an expression, just a physical expression of the concepts we have in the intellect. Note that word concept. The intellect conceives ideas just as the woman's womb conceives the zygote. Same thing. What fertilizes it? The tree fertilizes the intellect. Woman's womb is fertilized by the sperm. So there's a twofold thing comes together. One is provided by the male and the other by the female. Then with the intellect, the tree fecundates the intellect, and the intellect, so what it receives comes from the tree. How it receives it comes from the intellect. Universalize it. How it receives comes from external reality. So there's the father out there fertilizing the intellect. And the intellect provides this, it universalizes it. It's amazing where some of these things pop up. Boetius, a Roman nobleman, I stood outside his house, by the way, in Italy. Can't even remember the name of the city now. I know I promised to send to the man in charge there something, and I never ever did it. There was a reason for that. And he gave me a book with Boetius' works in it in Italian. But Boetius wrote something on the Trinity. And in writing on the Trinity, he started, what is science? What knowledge can we have? How does the intellect operate, etc.? Then St. Thomas comments that, it's magnificent, especially on the fifth question and the sixth, on science, relation of mathematics to science. Which brings me to another point. Not only do we have different sciences, but we can have a science which has mathematics applied to it. Now, that is what is done in modern science. You cannot rationalize. If you've got, say, there are 25 chipmunks per square mile or something, or per acre, on such like the island, the little whitefish lake, they had a special island where they did experiments with chipmunks all the time. I found it very amusing while I was there. And so what they do to rationalize it and raise it to a higher level intelligibility, they add mathematics to it and keep count of things. That way it appeals more to the mind than it does just to the senses. So that's called scientia media, middle science. It's middle, as it were, between, you might say, mathematics and, say, chemistry. And materially, it's empirical science. Formally, it's mathematical science. We won't go into all of that now. I've got notes here. We'll probably deal with that next class. So, there are these two kinds of sciences. I've given you examples there. But for example, the perinoetic, the biological consideration of man as a biped mammal. Ultimately, every aspect is reducible to some observable characteristic. For example, a mammal is an animal which provides milk for its young. Milk is a white liquid, etc., etc. But man, excuse me a moment. Man is a rational animal, and all concepts are ultimately reducible to principles of being. That is potency in act. So the method is what distinguishes sciences. Always remember that. The method distinguishes sciences. Syllogistic reasoning, reducible to principles of being. For instance, in society, oh, how those principles are blown to pieces so often by Congress and other governing bodies. There can be no coordination without subordination. You can't have a common end without a common authority, etc., etc. Or if you've got a common effect demands a common cause. Men everywhere believe in God. This is not a proof of the existence of God. It was doubted at one time at Terra del Fuego, at the south of South America, that they did not believe in God or any kind of religion at all, because the people had a means or a reason for not discussing it with foreigners. That's a personal thing. I asked a friend in Australia, some people take personal things very, very, very rigidly. I spoke to a friend of mine, I said, John, how are you earning your living these days? That's a personal question. I object to that. I just want to know, he was surviving, he's not teaching, he's not doing anything. How do you... Another person, I asked that to on one occasion, he said, oh, I have some, some judicious investments, he said. Just left it at that. That was all I want to know. How was John? I was worried about him. He's doing a lot of writing, this gentleman, John Young. And we know his books, etc. And he's not surviving off the books, but that's what I wanted to know. However, but religion and God has popped up everywhere. They have strange notions of God, but they know there is a God. The Australian Aborigines, they talk about the dream time when everything was made, and the North American Indians, and the New Guinean people, they can all know about spirit. They even think that the trees in New Guinea, they plant a garden. They do magnificent gardens, I believe. I've never seen them, but some people there have, some of the tribes have, and the Cuckoo people. Drive you cuckoo trying to say that. The Cuckoo people, they have magnificent gardens. But then, if somebody's in their way, they'll think nothing of hitting him on the head with a club and killing him. That's strange, I know. So, I think we'll leave it there, my friends. But if philosophy operated the way some people think it should operate, they'd say the whole is greater than its part. Kant thinks. So does St. Thomas. So do I think. Nothing can be and not be at the same time. We all think. The same cannot be the reason of opposites. I think that I think, etc. They throw doubt on everything. That's the skeptic. And nobody in their right mind is truly a skeptic. Like they said that nobody can be an atheist. There are serious scholars who have written that. Nobody in the long run can be an atheist. Like Jean-Paul Sartre is alleged to have said on one occasion, "Thank God I exist." He was an atheist, of course. Thank God I exist. Or thank God there's no God. The day I remember I was in Ottawa at the time, and some character in the Faculty of Philosophy put a big notice up the day Sartre dies. You know, Sartre was an existentialism. The only thing that they could be certain of is their existence. They put a big notice up. Jean-Paul Sartre isn't. Thank you.